I'm an academic working at the Oxford Internet Institute. This is a department of the University of Oxford. And I'm here to present an academic research project. Does campaigning on social media make a difference? And I think, this is the Data and Society workshop. I'm on the data side. Any members of society can work out whether you want to build a bridge to me or not after the presentation. And if you do want to, I'm very happy to hear from you. I should mention a few other people involved in the project. Scott Hale at the back here, Helen Margetts, who works at ATI, who has some affiliation here, and a few other people at the OII who can be here today. What's the point of the project? Well, the context of the project, and probably everyone in the room knows about this already, is the massive uptake of social media amongst the political class. This is less than 10 years old as a phenomenon, but it's now very, very normal. In fact, it's abnormal to see a politician who doesn't have some kind of social media account or some kind of social media presence, at least during the moment of political campaigns. And this applies all over, not only in the US and the UK, but now increasingly all over Europe, the rest of the world, et cetera, et cetera. And these social media accounts involve, not inconsiderable investment of staff time, of resources, and this is matched also by public activity and interest to a large extent. We're seeing lots and lots of people engaging with politics on social media becoming part of the way people talk about and think about and interact with politics. So lots of people using social media, yet we also live in an environment, and this is perhaps changing a little bit, but was certainly true when I started the project, of academic and media skepticism about the actual impact of using social media to campaign at election time in terms of actually making a difference for getting any votes. Plenty of academic articles have said things like, you can generate a kind of buzz on Twitter, it will give you some kind of political capital, but it doesn't really seem to translate into any votes. Lots of people talking about a so-called echo chamber effect online, whereas you go onto social media, you can immediately connect with people that already agree with you. But you can't necessarily change anyone's mind or reach out to someone who doesn't already agree with you or perhaps isn't considering voting for you already. As I say, I think some of these assumptions are changing post the 2017 election in the UK in particular, where now Jeremy Corbyn is seen as having had a successful campaign. So basically anything he did is being interpreted as a successful campaign strategy. Yet, despite all of this, not much literature, not much academic literature has really tried to address in a systematic way whether campaigning on social media actually makes a difference. Does it actually make a difference to vote outcomes if I go and fire up a Twitter account or a Facebook account or anything like that and use it in my campaign? And one of the reasons for this is addressing the effect of a technology on a political campaign is really hard to do in a systematic academic context. Usually if we want to address some kind of causality, what we need is some kind of experimental paradigm. But you can't go out in the middle of the white heat of an election cycle and say to a random sample of politicians, you guys are going to use social media, okay? You guys aren't, do nothing, and then we're going to compare the results. One of you is going to win. It'll be exciting. Politicians don't really go for that. So our aim is to try and do our best to fill this gap, lacking this possibility of doing experimental study. The question is simple. Does campaigning on social media make a difference, i.e. help gain votes in election time? Let's talk a little bit about the theory. Why might it help gain votes? What are the kind of pathways to impact from doing something on social media to having a positive impact on the amount of votes being counted on election day? Well, the basic assumption is that you're distributing a message on social media, and this message somehow filters its way back to being seen by voters. And this message could cause some things which are general to any type of political campaign. So there's a kind of informational effect. When you see any information about an election, you're informed that the election is going on. And in fact, people working in political science are consistently surprised to find other people in society who didn't even realize there was an election taking place. Because we're talking about it all the time, but it does happen. You might not know when it's coming up. You might not know that you've got to go and register to vote. So this kind of any campaigning, anything you say, even if it's totally off-putting, is going to inform people that there's an election coming up. Then there's the kind of rational voter effect. So if I say something about a policy, you might think, that's a good policy for me. I'm going to consider voting for you. And this is a lot of campaign literature is sort of premised on the idea that this happens. You kind of offer, you make a vote offer, and then people go and buy what you're offering. There's also a couple of things which are pretty much unique to social media. So that kind of previous stuff can sort of happen by advertising, it can happen by word of mouth, etc. On social media, we can observe something called viability effect sometimes. If we see a candidate with lots and lots of followers on social media, or they're getting lots and lots of retweets, we might assume, and this isn't necessarily the case, but we might assume that they're more viable as a candidate than someone whose social media profile looks terrible and they're not getting anywhere. And in fact, we know that viability is a massive driver of voting behaviour. You're very unlikely, or you're much less likely to vote for a political party if you think it's got no chance of success. We all know, this is being recorded, isn't it? We all think that perhaps some political candidates have purchased fake followers on social media. I'm not going to name any names. Precisely in order to enhance this kind of viability effect, to make it look like they're more popular than they actually are, because they think this is going to be impactful on people when they're seeing them. There's also people talking about a personality effect. In studies of celebrity, people often write about something called a parasocial relationship. People feel that they have a personal relationship with a celebrity, despite the fact that they've never met this person. And these personal parasocial relationships are enabled by technologies which make you feel as if you're being talked directly to you. I think one of the reasons Snapchat is quite impactful for brands and for people who started campaigning across it, because it feels very personal and very private. So this person's kind of speaking directly to you, whereas of course they're not. But these kind of things have been documented a little bit on social media. Now, it's worth mentioning, this is the last theory point, that social media impacts effects could happen in a number of more indirect ways. The social media campaign, putting stuff out on social media, might energize your kind of small base of supporters. They were probably going to vote for you anyway, but maybe they're more likely to turn out right now. Obviously, in different electoral systems, proportional representation versus fixed past the post, let's say, it's more important sometimes to energize the people who really agree with you. And other times it's more important to try and sort of steal voters from the opposition candidate by being a kind of ruthless centrist. You might enable and inform opinion leaders. A lot of people talk about sort of opinion leader effects of the mass media. We saw a chart, a terrible chart earlier on saying not everyone reads the BBC. I love the BBC, but I also realized that I've moved up very recently into a higher age demographic, which is a really depressing moment, right? But anyway, so I was in the like greenest of green age brackets for this BBC graph. But it could still be that the people reading the BBC, and that lots of people talk about this in media effects, then go on and talk about what they've read to other people. In fact, we talk about sort of having a high core of high consumption news people who then distribute their findings to their friends and family, etc. And the last thing, of course, is that social media contributions are broadcast obsessively now, rebroadcast by the press. There is probably an entire arm of every US newspaper which is dedicated just to reprinting what Donald Trump has said, selecting a few tweets, criticizing. It's a business now to just say, we found this on Twitter. It's news. But so putting stuff out on Twitter as a politician might gain you traditional press coverage, and we know that traditional press coverage has an impact on voting outcomes, et cetera, et cetera. So those are all the many reasons why might social media help gain votes. It's also worth mentioning what we call in social science intervening or confounding or lurking variables, things that might affect how much social media is having an impact, or things that might lead us to the wrong conclusion about when we say social media is having an impact. We would be expecting social media to have a higher impact for areas with higher social media penetration. That seems pretty obvious to me, right? People using social media in places where larger amounts of people are actually using social media themselves, and therefore potentially voting for them, are going to have a higher effect. We might also expect that this effect to be split across different parties. We know that parties have different demographics embedded within them, and these demographics use social media in different ways. Social media might also be a proxy for other things which are important to campaigns, such as the professionalization of a campaign. And this is one of the big challenges, as I was mentioning, big challenge about making a sort of genuine causal claim about, yes, social media affected this, is that all candidates are going to go out and do social media as part of a range of things that they think is going to help them win an election campaign. So it could just be a sort of proxy variable, an indicator that this campaign has professionalized. And this is, as I say, a sort of key challenge in the measure of campaign effects. So let me talk a little bit about what we did, which partly addresses some of these challenges, although they're still sort of there. What are the data? Well, we tracked all tweets by sitting MPs and candidates in the month before UK 2015 and UK 2017 general elections. We measured basically the effort that turned out to be exactly 6,000 people. In fact, were putting in on social media platform Twitter in the month before the general election, which is typically regarded as the campaign period. We took handle data from, they're basically the same organisation now, but it was called Your Next MP, and it's kind of moulded into Democracy Club, being run by My Society. I'm sure lots of people in the room have heard of My Society, a great civic tech, UK civic tech organisation. This only refers to Twitter, of course, and this is one of the weaknesses of the study. Is that we only have data on what candidates are doing on social media and Twitter. And we don't know, in fact, if you're more likely to use social media data in Twitter, you're also more likely to use Facebook. So it's kind of an indicator of a mass effect across all social media platforms. Or, and I think there's an element of truth to the second one, you kind of pick one social media account to really put effort into. And if you're using Twitter, you're probably not using Facebook. Something like that. But we don't have a systematic view of whether this is or is this case. So how much effort were these candidates putting in on Twitter? So you've got the 2 waves, 2 years of observation, 2015 and 2017 here. All the parties, or the 7 major parties in mainland Great Britain. So we excluded the Northern Ireland parties from analysis. Basically anyone who's working in UK political science immediately excludes Northern Ireland from analysis straight away. This is kind of just a done thing, because it's very different, and there's lots of different parties, and it's just annoying to try and include it in the model, so we don't bother. So this is England, Wales, and Scotland, 7 major parties, painstakingly selected the right colour for each of my box plots here, and this basically shows how much effort each of these parties were putting in 2015 and 2017. It's broadly the case that the median candidate, and the median is the thick black line within the box, was sending around 100 tweets within this month of observation. We can see that there's a little bit more effort going on in the SNP and in Plaid in both years of observation. In fact, a little bit less effort in UKIP and Liberal Democrats, especially in 2015. It's worth remembering that UKIP and Greens had a lot less candidates in 2017 than they did in 2015. Basically, I think they struggled to put it together in time because it was kind of a surprise election. It's also worth noting that the distribution is kind of quite skewed. This is on a log scale, by the way, so the individual spaces are orders of magnitude, log 10 scale. Most candidates sending around 100 tweets. A few really dedicated themselves, sending over 1,000, getting onto 2,000s in the period of observation. How does it spread around the country? This is only for 2015, so I didn't want to kind of bombard you with lots of different maps, but it's basically the same. There isn't really a strong geographic pattern. This is the number of tweets sent by candidates per constituency. This is a hex map developed by Ben Henning in Oxford, and this is a map. What's the opposite of a hex map? Normal map. We can see that there's a little bit more activity going on in the London region, but we also can't really see any systematic pattern in terms of north-south divide. Generally, it's quite spread, pretty well spread all throughout the country. Of course, it's one interesting thing we can measure with the data is where politicians actually are when they're sending the tweets. Now, we can't do this with all politicians for all data, because not every single tweet is geolocated, but a subset of tweets are geolocated. We found that, again, the sort of median average was around 50% of politicians' tweets actually coming from the constituency in this month period of observation. So they're still spending quite a lot of time going around to other places. And again, this is pretty normal. You might think that all politicians campaign in all their constituencies. They're just spread out. But actually, the party's going to have a few high-effort constituencies where politicians are concentrated, and probably many constituencies which barely get a visit because they're so uncompetitive. We can also, probably more importantly, say, what about the people tweeting about them? Where are they located? And again, this is worth talking about. One of the reasons why people have been critical of social media is that you can engage with lots and lots of people all the world over, but many of those people won't actually be eligible to vote for you. So in terms of political impacts, you really need to engage in the UK system with people who live, the 70,000 or so people who are eligible to vote in your constituency. We found actually that around 25% of tweets about politicians were coming from within the constituency. So by no means all. In fact, the majority are coming from outside, but still a kind of non-trivial portion of people's Twitter following seem to be amongst people who could conceivably vote for them. Okay, so that's what the data.
What percentage of tweets were geolocated? Do you have?
Say again?
So these are not all tweets, right?
That's right. That's right.
What percentage of geo?
It's very few. It's around 2%, 2 or 3%. Yeah. 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 I mean, so basically, we boldly assume, on the basis of nothing, that this 2% of people will be representative of everyone else. You can't really do anything better than that. Well, you can't really do anything better than that in one country with one language. Sometimes you can do a bit better than that. Okay, so that's the descriptive part of the data. What about the analysis? We've got three methods. OLS, ordinary least squares regression, with a few controls for the confounding variables. So we look at basically whether Twitter makes a difference, even accounting for the amount of money spent in a campaign. We use a few interaction terms, which is basically about whether Twitter makes more of a difference if certain conditions are true. And then we have a kind of hybrid fixed effects model. I'm sure you're all dying to know what that is. But basically, it's a time series type of analysis where we look at whether change in level of Twitter activity in 2015 is associated with any better or worse outcomes in 2017 amongst the subset of politicians that competed in both elections. Around 800 politicians competed in both elections. I found out doing this, in fact, that the vast majority of people who stand for election do it once and then they give up. And they think, I'm never doing this again. Probably because it was so awful. And so the vast majority of people who come back the next time are the ones that won previously. And this does create a few problems with the analysis, absolutely. But again, it's kind of best we can do. So you had most of the workshop's been about great ways of presenting data. I thought it would also be helpful to see an academic way of presenting data, which is to put a large table of numbers with some stars on it. I'm not going to explain all the numbers, don't worry. That's basically there to make me look scientific. Twitter use, we found, so we've got a variety of models basically, which says if you're using Twitter or if you're not using Twitter, and how many tweets you sent on the platform during the period of observation, how does that correlate with your vote share outcomes? And the models include things like spending, the party of the MP, and whether they're an incumbent MP, basically trying to get around problems of Twitter being a proxy for something else which is really causing an impact. All of these models showed that using Twitter, yes, had a positive impact. People who had a Twitter account did around 20% better on average than those without. Now remember, this isn't 20 percentage points better. I want to be clear about that. So someone can win the election with 50 percentage points of the vote. If you do 20% better than that person, then you've got 60 percentage points of the vote, because 20% of 50 is 10 percentage points. Don't know whether that made anything clearer or less confusing. But anyway, people are doing better with Twitter, and they're also doing better with sending more tweets. One of the interesting things we found in this, and this I think is important, is that the act of sending tweets, while not particularly impactful, and I'll come back to exactly how impactful it is later, compares quite well with spending. So you can see the number here, 0.03. is very close to the number 0.04. So sending tweets has roughly the same effect as spending more money on your campaign in these models. Next, we looked at interaction terms. Does sending more tweets have more of an impact if you've got more followers? Does it have more of an impact if you're campaigning in a constituency with high amounts of social media users? And we have various ways of trying to measure this, looking at the education level, the average wealth level, and the average internet use level of people in different constituencies. All the interaction effects broadly point in the direction we were expecting. They're not all statistically significant, which basically means we can't be really make a strong claim out of our data about them. About half of them are. And in general, this seems to indicate that the impact of social media may well be more likely to take a kind of indirect route, going through news media mentions or energizing your campaign base that people are really interested in voting for you already, but perhaps they're going to get out and campaign for you, than it is directly you talking to a voter and them thinking, yeah, I agree with you. I am actually going to vote for you. Last model, the hybrid fixed effects model, this is the strong test of causality. Does changing the same person doing more Twitter activity in one year than the other, does it result in more results for them, more votes for them? And the answer is yes, we found it to be the case. The same person doing more effort in their social media account will win more votes afterwards. The effect is pretty small. You need to increase tweeting by 175% to increase your vote level by 1%. So this suggests the kind of small amount of engagement is worthwhile in the platform. If you send a couple of hundred tweets, that's going to make a measurable difference than if you send nothing. But moving from the people that went from sending 100 tweets to 1,000 tweets, you know, the returns start to diminish pretty quickly. As I said before, this is a subset of the data. They're more successful MPs. They typically had higher social media profiles anyway because they competed in both elections. So also the results have to be kind of interpreted in that context. They might have been larger if we had more MPs to work on. What are the conclusions? I mean, I always say this when I presented it. We started this paper, or at least I did, thinking that, you know, I'm going to demonstrate that most politicians are wasting their time doing this, because I actually didn't really believe that you would find a strong measurable effect. And so my sort of reluctant conclusion is that the evidence is pretty strong that there is some positive difference, and the models that we've been able to estimate, you can make a reasonably strong causal claim within them. We're pretty sure that the result is very small, and I think you can make a very strong case that you can't really win an election solely by using social media campaign. But nevertheless, it's also comparable to other things that you can do to boost your campaign, like spending more money on it. I mean, that's another way of saying, of course, that spending lots of money doesn't always lead to the right outcome in an electoral race. You can see Hillary Clinton for details. But you know, there is something there, and it's especially considering it costs a lot less than spending money. It seems to be worthwhile doing it. As I said, probably the best strategy is to do a small amount of engagement with these platforms. As I've been saying throughout the presentation, there are plenty of weaknesses in the study. If you're an academic, weaknesses mean next steps and further funding required. I don't know if there are any grant bodies in the room, but that's what we need to do. We need to do studies of more elections. That would be great to get more even stronger claims, more platforms. It's kind of unsatisfactory to be working always with Twitter, and people who are in the data science community will know that Twitter is coming back again and again and again as the platform that's being studied, because it's the one that makes its data very widely available. And working with other platforms is or can be a bit more tricky, but we'd definitely like to work with Facebook and with Snapchat and with other types of campaign methods. And we'd also like to get into more about what is being said across Twitter. I mean, we've just counted the number of times you made a tweet, but we didn't actually try and analyze, was this tweet any good? Again, looking at the US election and Donald Trump, you might say that actually it's not so clear that doing very, very bad tweets is really negative in the campaign. So this is one of the reasons we've avoided this, because sort of independently measuring this was a good tweet is very, very hard to do. But it does seem like the case that there should be some people who have got an effective social media strategy and other people who aren't using it effectively, and that should change engagement with the platform. And cool, that's it. You can tweet at me if you've got positive feedback. Negative feedback goes to the email, and the paper is available on archive. Thanks for your attention. Happy to any questions.
You can tweet if you have positive feedback, but there's no way to decide what's positive.
Oh, also true. Also true.